I've come to think of this as Saturday's Notebook. It's the weekend, it's quiet, and the stories I talked about earlier this week bubble back to the surface, and for some reason they are still resonating with me. So these are some of the stories that mattered this week and will still matter a year from now. They just didn't get the attention they deserved because the outrage machine buries them. Pour something, smoke something. Let's sit with them for an hour. Hegseth is clearly a fascist. Let me repeat. Hegseth is clearly a fascist, inconvenienced by congressional oversight, and he would want nothing else but to rid his Pentagon of checks and balances. I have warned repeatedly on this show that second to Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth is the most dangerous person in the United States. He is a theocratic fascist, a transphobic racist, a misogynistic bigot who sees the war in Iran as the final battle between Christianity and Islam. We've gone over his religious beliefs, his political beliefs. In his heart, women should not be allowed to vote. Muslims should not be allowed to serve in our government, let alone be allowed into our country. He does not believe in democracy or the government established by our founding fathers. Pete Hegseth believes in the supremacy of Christian law over American law. But what is Christian law? What his church leaders say it is. They're not quoting Jesus, they're quoting some cherry pickings from the Old Testament. Pete Hegseth believes the only thing that will save America is if the elders from his church, from his Protestant denomination, decide who and what is an American. This is not hyperbole. This is fact. It's in Hegseth's writings, his actions, his comments, and behavior before Congress this week. Like any crazed Christian nationalist, Hegseth is unshakable in his belief, cloaked in his bourbon-soaked interpretation of the Bible and the Constitution, hiding like a coward behind our troops and flag, a flag he uses as a handkerchief to blow his nose into. Pete Hegseth cannot be humiliated or convinced that he's a war criminal, which he is. Pete Hegseth, by every definition of the term, is a war criminal. You do not reason with war criminals. You do not reason with fascists. You do not appease war criminals. You do not appease fascists. Pete Hegseth is a fascist and a war criminal, and he must be removed from the Pentagon and then frog-marched before an American judge and held accountable for the hundreds, if not thousands, of war crimes Pete Hegseth committed in direct violation of war crime statutes passed in 1996. I urge all members of Congress and the American people to stop worrying about The Hague and the International Criminal Court, which we're not signatories to, or the World Court. I urge everyone to read the War Crimes Act of 1996, signed by President Bill Clinton, into law on August 21st, 1996, U.S. Code 2441. It established criminal penalties for grave breaches of the 1949 Geneva Conventions. It makes violating the 1949 Geneva Conventions against domestic law. Members of our armed services must obey the 1949 Geneva Conventions as of 1996, the War Crimes Act of 1996. I urge you to read this law, and you would conclude that by every definition of a war crime, Pete Hegseth is guilty. The targeting of alleged narco-terrorists in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific that started back in September Those are war crimes under American law. Forget international maritime law, the rules of engagement set up by the Geneva Conventions. I'm talking about American law. That double tap where they circled back to kill survivors of that drone strike, which our military did. They said we did it. That is a war crime. Punishable, by the way, because more than one person was killed. According to the War Crimes Act of 1996, that is punishable by execution. And there's no statute of limitations, meaning Hegseth just won't be able to travel to Europe without getting arrested by the World Court if and when the United States ever decides to obey the rule of law. Pete Hegseth will be put on trial here in the United States for war crimes. I don't know when it's going to be, 10 years from now, given he's 45 years old, 50 years from now. They're still rounding up Nazi war criminals and their collaborators. This war in Iran and the airstrikes over the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific, those airstrikes in Yemen where Hegseth targeted an Ethiopian refugee camp, those are, by every estimation of what constitutes a war crime. Not on the international stage, here in the United States, according to the War Crimes Act of 1996. Trump is so opposed to the weaponization of our Justice Department, he ordered Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche to indict former FBI Chief James Comey for threatening to kill the President of the United States. That's right. Former FBI Director James Comey was indicted on Tuesday, charged with 2 counts of threatening the life of our president. And yesterday, he was placed under arrest after turning himself over to federal law enforcement inside a Virginia courtroom where he was arraigned during a hearing that lasted fewer than 10 minutes. Comey entered no plea, but in an earlier Substack post said he was innocent, and his lawyers say they plan to file a motion accusing Donald Trump's Justice Department of vindictive prosecution. Great, so they're going to tie up our courts with some bogus lawsuit accusing Donald Trump of vindictive prosecution. Comey is charged with threatening the life of Donald Trump when he took to social media in May of last year and posted this picture of seashells on the beach, arranged in such a way to spell out the numbers 8647. 47 denoting Donald Trump, the 47th President of the United States. 86, a term used by bartenders when they want to stop serving someone and or toss them out of the establishment for being too drunk. But the Justice Department argues 86 has come to signify something far more sinister than removing a customer from a bar. So, while the White House, the Justice Department, and several Republicans insist this image you're looking at was a death threat, the only words Comey added to this Instagram post was, quote, "cool shell formation on my beach walk, 8647. I mean, wasn't the Norman invasion also 8647? I'm not good at history, but I'm pretty certain 8647 is when William the Conqueror invaded England. Or maybe 8647 is when the Magna Carta was signed in 8647. Could mean a lot of things. No, it means, according to the Trump Justice Department, it's a death threat. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, alongside FBI Director Patel, announced the indictment late Tuesday. Despite Comey being an FBI chief with no prior arrests except for Trump's other indictment last year that failed, despite Comey being a Boy Scout, Patel and Blanche said it's important that we show the world that in America, nobody is above, or in this case, below the law. Taking questions from the press after announcing Comey's indictment, Blanche refused to address the First Amendment factors at play here, whether posting pictures of seashells is protected speech. This is now the second time Trump's Justice Department has indicted Comey in the past year. By the way, they also fired his daughter, Maureen Comey, who was a top prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York. She helped prosecute Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Gee, I wonder why Todd, Blanche, Pam Bondi, and Email Bove would have fired her. Comey was indicted last year, charged with lying before Congress in 2020 when he denied under oath that he ever authorized anyone in the FBI to leak information to the press. That case was thrown out. There was an illegitimate prosecutor, and there's a statute of limitations, so that's gone. This new indictment, this is the only thing they could get on Comey. It is part of Trump's directive. The reason Comey was indicted on Tuesday is Trump has ordered the Justice Department to be weaponized to get even with anyone who weaponized the Justice Department against him. A little different. Just a tiny little difference here. Trump is guilty. Trump is guilty. Comey's a Boy Scout. Now, I know we all hate Comey because of the email announcement. He's reopening the investigation of Hillary. I know. But that was against protocol, not against the law. Trump was asked if Comey's pictures of seashells, Trump was asked if Comey's pictures of seashells put him, Donald Trump, in danger. And Trump said, probably. Yes, so we must indict Comey. He then accused Comey of contributing to a climate that sparks political violence. Watch what you say and watch how you arrange seashells. Yes, we have a First Amendment, but that doesn't give you the right to arrange seashells that spell out fire in a crowded movie theater. Bloomberg reporting that the suspect in Saturday night shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, charged with attempting to kill the president, will be facing even more charges. But Jeanine Pirro, the D.C. prosecutor, says it's too early to say what these new charges are. She said they're still waiting for the ballistic tests to come back. This is really interesting. Reuters is reporting that so far, the legal filings from the Justice Department do not accuse the suspect of firing that shot which sent a Secret Service agent to the hospital Saturday night. Thankfully, that Secret Service agent who took the bullet, thankfully, he was wearing a vest. He was released later that night. And everyone assumed he was shot by the suspect. Todd, Blanche, acting attorney general, said, we're pretty sure he was shot by the suspect, but we're waiting for the ballistic tests to come back. And Reuters is reporting that so far, the suspect has not been charged with firing a shot at the Secret Service agent, Kash Patel. This is an actual Photoshop with some AI. This is real. This is real Photoshop and real AI of Kash Patel, hard at work, surrounded by, I don't know what that is. Is that vomit? Yeah. Kash Patel says he's pouring through the ballistics reports to determine who shot the Secret Service agent. So it raises a very serious problem for the Republican Party and, of course, the gun lobby. What if the suspect didn't shoot the Secret Service agent? What if instead that Secret Service agent was hit by friendly fire, accidentally hit by friendly fire? It blows holes in the good guy with a gun narrative that justifies putting as many guns as possible into the hands of ordinary Americans. If you're a Republican, if you're a gun lobbyist, you're doing everything you can to make sure that ballistic report comes back and says, oh yeah, the suspect shot the Secret Service agent. Because what would it say if the Secret Service agent, a good guy with a gun, was accidentally shot by another good guy with a gun? What would that say? Very, very difficult if you're a gun lobbyist. We know when confronted by incidents like Saturday night, even the world's best sharpshooters don't always know where to aim. This was being shown as an example of why we don't need gun laws. We need more good guys with guns. Well, if this ballistics report comes back and says a good guy with a gun accidentally discharged his weapon into another good guy with a gun, that should tell you everything you need to know about why we need more gun laws in this country. Meanwhile, acting Attorney General Todd Blanche is desperately trying to get nominated to serve as full-time Attorney General. Is that him? I saw this picture before. Is that him begging Donald Trump or about to do something? He's on his knees. It looks like he's either praying, begging, or about to do something prison style for Donald Trump. He desperately wants to become the real Attorney General. He hates being an acting Attorney General. Well, you're always acting as an attorney, Todd Blanche. You're a crappy attorney. You're just acting like one. Donald Trump is a convicted felon because of your lawyering, Todd Blanche. So you've always been acting as an attorney. So he will do anything. He indicted Comey, whatever you want, mein Fuhrer, whatever you want. As Bobby Kennedy said, the good Bobby, not the Bobby Kennedy whose brain was devastated by an earworm. Bobby Kennedy, the father, he famously said, the GDP measures everything in life except what makes life worth living. So, economists are painting a rosy picture right now. Economy grew 2%. They say despite the war in Iran, despite high energy prices. The fact is the economy grew 2% because of the war in Iran, because of high energy prices. See, they just look at the big bucket. They see $31 trillion. They don't care where it comes from. 31 trillion, all in, all the domestically produced goods and services. It doesn't matter that people can't afford health insurance because it's too expensive. United Healthcare making a fortune. That gets factored into the $31 trillion. The bucket is growing because healthcare is so expensive. Doesn't matter, gasoline prices are unaffordable for you and me. Exxon's booking record profits. That gets thrown into the $31 trillion bucket. You see how we measure our economy? See how we measure growth? It's why the stock market keeps hitting record highs. Now, I don't know. I didn't look at the stock market today. I could check it, leave a comment. I don't know. Did it plummet today? I don't follow it that closely. I do know it's hitting record highs. Why is it hitting record highs? because record profits. The yardsticks we use to measure success and failure only benefit the richest 1%. There's no official yardstick to measure who's miserable. There's no immiseration index. Who's being left out of this incredible economic growth? The reason they don't have yardsticks for that is because if they did, we would discover that 99% of our country doesn't participate in this record growth. So they don't bother to measure that. We're not allowed to know officially how crappy our life is in order for Jeff Bezos to have a $250 million wedding in Venice. Instead, this is what they do to you. We're told right now the economy is on fire, so it must be my fault I'm forced to choose between rent and food. That's what they do to you. And by they, I mean the richest 1%. And yes, it's a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy to keep money, to concentrate the wealth concentrate the wealth into a few hands. Yes, it's a conspiracy. Federal Reserve is in on it. Congress is in on it. And you're kind of in on it because, excuse me, you're in on it and I'm in it because today I walked past 5 homeless people and didn't give them all my money. We're all in on it. We're all trying to keep what we have, give a little to charity, but not rack up too much debt. That's the conspiracy. And it's always been the conspiracy since the time of Hammurabi. The Washington Post reporting that because Iran closed Hormuz, and now because Trump also closed Hormuz, the price of filling up your car is now at the same level it reached when Trump's buddy, Vladimir Putin, invaded Ukraine. When Donald Trump returned to office in January of 2025, a gallon of gas was under $3, and it's more than doubled in some parts of our country. But our defense chief, Pete Hegseth, says that's a small price to pay to make certain Iran discontinues a nuclear weapons program that they discontinued 23 years ago. Wow. It's a small price to pay if you're Pete Hegseth. But the rest of us didn't make millions telling lies on Fox and Friends, Pete Hegseth. We don't have your money. We don't have 75 grand in cash lying around like you did to pay a woman to keep quiet after she accused you of rape. All of this is because Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth, well, Pete Hegseth wants to kill Muslims in Iran, and Trump just wants to kill people and consolidate power. Now, they also happen to be stupid. And because they're stupid and arrogant, you can't be arrogant unless you're stupid, they had no idea who they were going up against, and that would be the Iranians. They are clearly being humiliated by Iran, not just strategically, but tactically. I mean, Hormuz is a strategic humiliation. Tactically, I don't know if you've seen the Lego slop that's getting passed around on social media. They are saying things about Donald Trump that I saw some of these videos. I went, hey, that's my president. It was so bad. That's my president. And then I remembered, okay, so they're being humiliated. Trump is being humiliated by Donald Trump. By blockading the Strait of Hormuz, Donald Trump is literally doing Iran's work for them. he might as well be dropping bombs on middle America. Iran only has one weapon against us, choking off the Strait of Hormuz. But for some reason, Trump and Hegseth, in order not to be humiliated, to look smarter than they actually are, to act like they're in charge, they've announced Iran doesn't close Hormuz. We do. Everyone else is saying this is stupid and insane. And by the way, we're all going to die, D-bag, if you don't open up Hormuz. Everybody is saying Trump and Hegseth have been humiliated by Iran. Under the War Powers Act, passed in the immediate aftermath of Vietnam in 1973, they passed this to prevent another quagmire. And according to the War Powers Act, a president can only commit U.S. soldiers overseas to fight a war for 60 days. And then after 60 days, that president must have congressional approval to continue the war. Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the war. So Republicans are reluctant to call this what it is, a war. They'll say, well, ground troops have not yet been deployed. Really? Because 14 are dead and more than 300 are wounded. Speaker Mike Johnson said, quote, the U.S. is not currently in a state of active kinetic military bombing. Therefore, he sees no need to push for a war authorization tomorrow when, by law, one must be passed or it's over. 3,600 Iranians have died since this not a war first started. One of our Tomahawks killed at least 175 children when we accidentally bombed an elementary school that our Navy mistook for a military base. All this while the Pentagon is asking for $1.5 trillion for the 2027 budget and a $200 billion emergency not a war supplemental. They want Congress to pass a not a war supplemental to pay for the not a war in Iran. And Donald Trump, meanwhile, refusing to end his blockade of Hormuz, he is now choking off 20% of the world's oil, 30% of the world's fertilizer. Iran reportedly said today they are willing to open up Hormuz if the United States will, but Donald Trump says the United States, will not open up the Strait of Hormuz until Iran agrees never to build a nuclear weapon. Well, they agreed to that in 2003 and 2015. They don't have a nuclear weapons program. Yes, they enrich uranium up to 60% to piss people off, but they have no nuclear weapons program. So Pete Hegseth is a coward who hides behind the flag, his counterfeit religion, his misunderstanding of the Constitution or contempt for the Constitution. He's a coward. He's just a frightened little boy who drinks. He wages war on the media. Doesn't want to be asked questions. He has banned the media from the halls of the Pentagon. Reporters are forbidden from talking to any Pentagon official without an escort. I don't know why prostitutes have to be brought in. I don't know why they're hiring escorts at the Pentagon. Oh, it's a different type of escort. Well, here is Pete Hegseth last week calling reporters unpatriotic.
Well, we're always on the lookout for CI threats, any internal threats, anyone talking out of school about things they should not. We take leaking very seriously here, informally or formally, which is why some of the reporting done by some of the people in here is incredibly problematic. They're willing to publish things based on classified information that would potentially harm those in harm's way. And we think them doing so is incredibly irresponsible and unpatriotic. And it would encourage members of the press to think twice about the lives they're affecting when they publish things in their publications like the New York Times.
think twice about the lives you're affecting, like me, Pete Hegseth. Because when you report on my incompetence, you're affecting my life. But he doesn't say that. He just says, it's the troops. You're hurting the troops. But when they report on his incompetence, killing our troops, that's unpatriotic, right? That's unpatriotic. Well, Hegseth, and you notice the George W. Bush mannerisms? Hegseth was referring partly to a report by CBS about American soldiers dying at Port, I'm mispronouncing this, Shoaiba. It's a major port in southern Kuwait. It's about 50 miles from Kuwait City. I'm not pronouncing it properly, but on March 1st of this year, it was the day after Trump began bombing Iran, the Iranians launched a one-way suicide drone towards a tactical operations center in the port of Shoaiba, and it killed 6 U.S. Army Reserve soldiers, injuring more than 30. And CBS broke the story that the soldiers were placed on an X too close to the Iranian border, too vulnerable. Their air defense systems failed, and there were no warning sirens that were activated before the impact. And we've talked about this on the show. There were no medics, no ambulances. The injured soldiers had to commandeer civilian automobiles to drive to a hospital. It was a disaster. So he had to answer for this during the House hearings on Wednesday. Congressman Pat Ryan, a Democrat from New York, wanted answers on this drone attack at Port Shoaiba in Kuwait and wanted to know why you sent our troops to what was referred to as an indefensible base. Hegseth accused Congressman Ryan of playing gotcha and monologuing falsehoods, unquote, monologuing falsehoods. One little problem with this. Congressman Pat Ryan, Democrat from New York, 18th Congressional District, is a combat veteran, served with the Army from 2004 to 2009. He was a captain, intelligence officer. He graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point, and he did 2 combat tours in Iraq. He was deployed to Mosul in 2008 during the height of the insurgency. He has 2 Bronze Star medals, an Army Commendation Medal, Army Achievement Medal, and you can see Pete Hegseth crumbling, withering underneath the questioning of Congressman Pat Ryan. Watch the defense chief turn into a frightened little boy, which he is. Hegseth is a frightened little boy. That's why he has to talk tough. That's why he's an alcoholic, or is allegedly an alcoholic. That's why he has belongs to some bizarre religious cult. He's a frightened little boy. An abusive man. Abusive men are frightened little boys. Here is the withering cross-examination from Congressman Pat Ryan.
Before the war started, there was clear intelligence that Shoaiba was high on Iran's target list. Internal analysis had said the site was indefensible from aerial attack and should not be used. Yet you sent our soldiers from the 103rd Sustainment Command there anyway. Is that true or false? True or false? Straightforward question.
Are you going to give me a chance to answer or just play gotcha?
Did you send them there or not?
we took proactive
I'll
measures
take that
from the
as a yes
beginning to
and
ensure
reclaim my
force
time.
protection and defensive posture were
let's talk,
maximized
Mr.
across
Secretary,
the theater.
Let's talk about what defenses they had. Prior to the attack, officers on the ground knew our troops were vulnerable. In fact, they requested additional force protection. Did they receive it?
Wherever humanly possible, force protection and counter UAS was always made available.
They did not. In fact, when asked to describe the base's defense, one survivor who's come forward from the unit said, quote, I would put it in the none category. From a drone defense capability, none. So let's be clear, no counter drone capabilities, no counter rocket systems, no counter mortar or counter artillery, not even the basic overhead protection that you and I had 20 years ago in Iraq. And now 6 of our soldiers are dead. The next day, you downplayed the attack. You said it was a squirter that squeaked through fortified defenses. But since then, thankfully, brave survivors have come forward to set the record straight. One of our surviving soldiers told CBS, quote, painting a picture that one squeaked through is a falsehood. Another said the unit was, quote, unprepared to provide any defense for itself. It was not a fortified position. Another survivor said the building's protection was about as weak as one gets. Secretary Hegseth, that is obviously in direct contradiction to what you said from the Pentagon podium the next day. So are you saying that these soldiers, our soldiers who survived this horrific attack, are lying?
What I'm saying is before the commencement of the conflict, we put in maximum defensive posture we could.
That's a direct
We moved
contradiction to
70
what they said.
in this directing. Can I speak, or are you just going to monologue falsehoods all over the place?
It's not a falsehood.
We moved 7,500 troops off of the X based on the intel.
Stop.
Based on the intel.
Stop. Reclaiming my time.
Because you yell doesn't make you right. Just because you yell doesn't make you right.
I'm reclaiming my time on behalf of these survivors.
Just because you yell doesn't mean you're right. How many kids have said that to authority figures? Just because you yell at me doesn't mean you're right. Frightened little man, Pete Hegseth. Now, 3 marriages, accused, I don't know if it's true, but there's something going on with his manhood that he has to, he's a frightened little man, is what he is. And he's typical. This is Congressman Pat Ryan, and Hegseth knows he's outmanned here. And watch Hegseth's body language.
It's not a falsehood.
We moved 7,500 troops off of the X based on the intel.
Stop.
Based on the intel.
Stop. Reclaiming my time.
Because you yell doesn't make you right. Just because you yell doesn't make you right.
I'm reclaiming my time on behalf of these survivors. You just said what they said is a falsehood.
There's a much larger picture.
True?
There's a much larger picture at play here that included integrated air defenses, bunkers, moving people off the X
why, Mr. Secretary,
to ensure that they were not part of the target. We moved those troops and all across the theater, thousands of troops off the X, off of their bases, because we knew what Iran was going to try to strike, and we knew there could be a tragic moment. There could be a tragic moment where something could get through. Of course, that's the consequence of conflict, and we remember those 6 every single day.
I want to finish.
But don't play games with.
I'm not playing games. I want to finish with one more quote from a survivor of the attack, and I put this on the record. Telling the truth is important, and we're not going to learn from these mistakes if we pretend these mistakes didn't happen. Secretary Hegseth, those soldiers told the truth. Those soldiers are braver than you are.
I commend them.
They are asking for accountability. They deserve accountability, and I'm asking for the same, starting with you. And as I said a year ago, you need to resign immediately.
I commend those soldiers.
I yield back.
So Hegseth is a fascist and a war criminal. And while that was withering, you cannot humiliate or get through to a fascist war criminal. All you can do is arrest them. He should be arrested. There are laws on the book. The War Crimes Act of 1996 here in the United States. Pete Hegseth is not just a fascist, he's a war criminal, and he should be arrested. Nobody's going to humiliate him. He's wrapped in his own self-assuredness, his own religious purity. He's a fascist, theological fascist, and a war criminal. That's a fact. I'm not calling for him to be hurt physically. I'm calling for our government to enforce laws that are on the books, the War Crimes Act of 1996, and arrest this man. That's all I'm asking. Don't want to see him hurt. Don't want to see his family hurt. Just want him arrested for war crimes. That's all I want. He's also stupid, and he knows he's stupid. That's why he drinks. And he cannot tell us how much the war had cost or will cost, because he had two nonprofits before he became Secretary of Defense that he ran into bankruptcy. He was removed from two nonprofits that he set up for veterans that, according to reports, he just spent all the money and didn't keep track. And who better to run a $1 trillion a year Pentagon than somebody who spends money like a drunken Pete Hegseth? Not a drunken sailor, a drunken Pete Hegseth. So he says, what, 25 billion? He kept giving different answers as to what the war cost. He also claimed, we never asked you for 200 billion. I have that. I'm going to play a clip where he denies that they're asking for a $200 billion war supplemental. Here is Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander, and she, I believe, is not a congresswoman from California. I may be wrong here. I think she represents New Hampshire, and she's everything Pete Hegseth despises. And because she's a woman, and she served in the United States Navy Reserve as an intelligence officer, so she's got her bona fides. Here she is asking Pete Hegseth, what does this war cost and how is it affecting Americans? And Pete Hegseth thought he was on Fox and Friends. This is the most childish behavior I've seen since Donald Trump or Pam Bondi.
Mr. Hegseth, can I ask you, do you know what the average cost of a gallon of gas was in this country on February 28th?
Well, it depends on where you live. If you live in California, it's $8.
$2.83. Do you know what the average cost of a gallon of gas is today?
Well, much higher in California.
$4.23. I gotta say, Mr. Hegseth, you said you've got a crack economic team that's looking at the impacts of this war on the American taxpayer, and you can answer this basic question. That should shock the conscience of every American.
In California, I don't think she's a congresswoman from California. He was digging into California. Like, gas is more expensive in California because of all the taxes they charge to clean up the air. California, I think she's New Hampshire. So that was just childish and stupid, but that's how he rolls. There were a lot of congresswomen who got under his skin. Representative Sarah Jacobs represents, I believe, San Diego. And she says, because, was it Camp Pendleton? Am I getting that wrong? There's a Marine base. I've actually gone there. I think it's Camp. I apologize. She said, I get a lot of calls from the families of Marines when Donald Trump posts, open that effing Hormuz or we're going to bomb you back to the Stone Ages, that the wives and the husbands and the families of our soldiers think Donald Trump is demented. And she's getting calls like, I don't trust him as my spouse, my loved one's commander. And Pete Hegseth did the whataboutism. What about Joe Biden? You weren't concerned about Joe Biden's mental capacity. Well, Ro Khanna is a Democrat from Silicon Valley. He's worth several $100 million. He asked about what this war is costing, and Hegseth couldn't give him a straight answer. And then Ro Khanna not only talked about what it's costing taxpayers in terms of money spent on bombs and soldiers, but what it's costing us in terms of paying higher gas and food prices. And Pete Hegseth dismissed the rising costs of food on the home front as, quote unquote, domestic things. Like, why are you bothering me with domestic things? Here is Congressman Ro Khanna.
Do you know how much it will cost Americans in terms of their increased cost in gas and food over the next year because of the Iran war?
I would simply ask you what the cost is of an Iranian nuclear bomb.
I'm going to give you that opportunity.
I would simply ask you what you're playing gotcha questions about domestic things. I'm not.
You're saying it's a gotcha question to ask what it's going to be in terms of the increased cost.
Why won't you answer what it costs to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb?
I give you that, sir. But let me.
What would it cost? What would you pay to ensure Iran doesn't get a nuclear bomb? What would you pay?
I reclaim my time. Do you not know? You had no one do the analysis of what the increased cost of gas and food on the American people are going to be?
What is the cost of Iran holding that straight at issue with nuclear weapons?
It's $631 billion, which means it's an increase of $5,000 a year for American households. Now, let me give you this point. You're saying that your operation is preventing a nuclear Iran. Will you acknowledge that there is an economic cost to the American people for doing what you believe is necessary to make Iran denuclear? Will you acknowledge the economic cost?
We have an incredible economic team that's managing this better than what the previous administration did to our economy. What the previous administration did for inflation.
You know what's upsetting?
I reclaim my time. COVID, and you're going to lecture this administration about the economy?
You know what is upsetting?
Incredible.
You didn't even do the analysis on how much it's costing the American people. It's one thing if you said, okay, it costs the American people $5,000, but we think it's worth it. That's what we've done in World War II and other wars. Here's what it costs. You got to pay for it. You don't even know what the average American is paying. You don't know what we paid in terms of the missiles that hit the Iranian school. You don't know what we're paying in terms of gas. You don't know what we're paying in terms of food. Your 25 billion number is totally off. It's the incompetence. It's the incompetence.
It's the incompetence. But what about Joe Biden? What about the way Joe Biden muffed COVID? That's what he's saying. Again, you're not, the only way you can win with a fascist, and that's what Pete Hegseth is, a fascist, and a war criminal, is to arrest him. That's the only way. He needs to be arrested. I don't want any physical harm to him or his family. I want him arrested. I want the laws on our books enforced. And you cannot humiliate a fascist or a war criminal. We've seen this, the Wiesenthal Center. We've seen what happened after World War II, how Joey Mengele lived out his life. They go on. They grow grapes in their backyards. We saw Eichmann. You cannot get a fascist war criminal to acknowledge that they should be arrested, that they're wrong. That's why they're fascist war criminals. You're looking at the single biggest coward in the Senate, Thom Tillis of North Carolina. Republican Senator Thom Tillis was the deciding vote when it came to Hegseth's confirmation. All Thom Tillis had to do was vote no, and Hegseth's nomination would have gone down to defeat. We all knew about the $50,000 Hegseth paid that woman to keep quiet about her rape allegations. But there was also Hegseth's sister-in-law from his second marriage. In a sworn affidavit submitted to the Senate Armed Services Committee in January of 2025, Pete Hegseth's former sister-in-law alleged that Hegseth's second wife lived in fear of Pete Hegseth throughout their marriage. The second Mrs. Hegseth, according to the sworn affidavit from Pete Hegseth's sister-in-law, the second Mrs. Hegseth had to hide in the closet for fear of getting pummeled by our current defense chief, who insists on being referred to as war chief. Thom Tillis met personally, Senator Thom Tillis met personally with Hegseth's former sister-in-law. He promised if she just signed the sworn affidavit, he would withhold his deciding vote unless she, Hegseth's sister-in-law, was allowed to testify during Hegseth's confirmation hearings. And then the White House began pressuring Thom Tillis. And according to reports, the FBI warned Republican Senator Thom Tillis about threats to his life and his staffers' lives because he was publicly wavering on the Hegseth nomination. Public threats were taking place inside the Oval Office, with newly sworn-in Donald Trump threatening to launch a primary challenge against Thom Tillis, who should be running for re-election right now. He's not. I'll get to that in a second. In March of 2025, Thom Tillis's office released recordings, really disturbing recordings, graphic death threats, callers, Hegseth supporters, Trump supporters threatening to shoot Senator Thom Tillis or attack him with an axe. And it wasn't just Senator Thom Tillis. His staff was told by the FBI, don't come into the office, work remotely. This was for his North Carolina offices. The FBI said, you know what? We have credible threats here. It's not safe for you to come to work. So Thom Tillis's office said that the senator has faced death threats throughout his entire career. And his staff said he got death threats in 2024 because he was in support of divesting TikTok of Chinese ownership. But his staff said never in Thom Tillis's Senate career has he received the volume and severity of death threats during the confirmation hearings of Pete Hegseth. See, this is how fascism takes root, because of cowards like Thom Tillis. With all those death threats, with the FBI telling him he's not safe, with the FBI and local police telling staffers work remotely, Thom Tillis caved and decided to vote for Pete Hegseth. Those death threats were the reason not to vote for Pete Hegseth, you dumb hump. All he had to do, Thom Tillis, was vote no. But he was too chicken shit. He promised Pete Hegseth's sister-in-law, sign this sworn affidavit and I will withhold my vote until you have an opportunity to testify. So she signed it. She stepped up. She was willing to risk her life. But this coward, this chicken shit coward, Senator Thom Tillis, not only chickened out, he didn't demand that they hear from Pete Hegseth's sister-in-law. He declared, you know what, I've had it. I'm not seeking re-election. And he declared, this is my last year in the Senate. This is how fascism takes root. You need cowards like Thom Tillis. I'm going to talk about this grand conspiracy. We have a president who is a paranoid schizophrenic with delusions of grandeur, and he is forcing the Justice Department to prosecute the grand conspiracy against him. It's a real thing. The Comey indictment is part of a larger investigation being led by our Justice Department to look into what they call the grand conspiracy against Donald Trump. This is why we have medication and psychiatrists. Instead, down in Miami, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, this would be a federal prosecutor named Jason Redding Quinones. He is leading that Justice Department office down there. They have convened a grand jury, and they are calling witnesses to come testify about the grand conspiracy against Donald Trump. And they plan on calling James Comey, and they issued a subpoena for former CIA Director John Brennan to come testify about the grand conspiracy, which Trump insists began during the final year of the Obama administration. The grand conspiracy. According to Southern District of Florida prosecutor, U.S. Attorney Jason Redding Quinones, the grand conspiracy, your tax dollars, by the way, the grand conspiracy was the deep dark state using the CIA and the FBI to destroy Donald Trump's candidacy and then, after he got elected, his presidency. Again, the Justice Department, under Pam Bondi, appointed this prosecutor, Jason Redding Quinones, and he is spending his salary, his time, we're paying him to get to the bottom of the grand conspiracy. That's him, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, Jason Redding Quinones. He is the prosecutor working to prove the grand conspiracy resulted in phony charges of Russian interference. Not only that, the phony charges of Donald Trump mishandling classified documents, the phony charges against Trump accusing him of attempting to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election, which, according to the grand conspiracy, was stolen from Trump by the deep, dark state, which put Joe Biden into office. It is the grand conspiracy. They've put it all together for us, and they're going to prosecute this down in the Southern District of Florida, your federal government at work. Now, why is it in the Southern District of Florida? Why do you think? Well, why wouldn't it be Washington, D.C.? Because the Justice Department went venue shopping, and they picked Miami so they could have Justice Aileen Cannon, a Trump appointee. She would oversee the grand jury. Remember Justice Aileen Cannon? Cannon, you might remember, threw out Jack Smith's prosecution of Donald Trump for mishandling classified documents, violating the Espionage Act. We all heard the tapes. This was a slam dunk. They said, of all the indictments against Donald Trump, this was the easiest one to prove. Everyone knew this was going to be the easiest one to prosecute. So Jack Smith, because he is fair, he decided to venue shop in favor of Donald Trump. He decided, you know what, I'm prosecuting Trump in Washington, D.C. for attempting to overthrow the government of the United States on January 6th. I'm going to give him a break. This is a slam dunk. This requires no thinking. I'm going to venue shop on behalf of the president or ex-president Donald Trump, and I'm going to file these charges down in Miami, in the district where he lives at Mar-a-Lago, so that he can have a more favorable venue, find a jury pool that might be a little more sympathetic to Donald Trump's violation of the Espionage Act. And he ended up having Judge Aileen Cannon as the judge in the classified documents case, and she threw it out. She's a Trump appointee. She's ignorant, ill-equipped for the job. Well, she's a Trump appointee. And so Aileen Cannon threw out the classified documents case, claiming Jack Smith was illegitimate because he was a federal prosecutor who had not been confirmed by Congress. There was no precedent for this ruling other than Judge Clarence Thomas opining in 2024, exactly almost 2 years ago. Remember the immunity ruling where the Roberts Court said, we're going to send these indictments against Trump back to the lower court. We have to parse out which of these crimes is an official act and an unofficial act. And Clarence Thomas wrote a concurring opinion where he wondered whether or not Jack Smith was legitimately a prosecutor for the Department of Justice, since he was never confirmed by the Senate. And Aileen Cannon said, I'm going to go with that. And she threw the case out. And Jack Smith was in the process of appealing this. But then the American people decided to elect Donald Trump again. Eventually, there's collective guilt here. Eventually, you got to stop blaming the system and Jack Smith and the courts and start blaming the American people for supporting Donald Trump, for voting for him. The Wall Street Journal reporting that our national debt is more than 100% of our gross domestic policy. So what does that mean? Federal government runs budget deficits every year. When you cut taxes for the richest 1%, but also spend $1 trillion on defense, or $1.5 trillion in 2027, you're going to run a deficit. And to keep the government running, to pay the bills, the United States has to issue bonds that pay interest. That's what debt is. Debt is the bonds that get issued, the savings bonds, the T-bills that gets issued, and the government pays interest. 10% of our annual budget goes just towards paying the interest on these bonds. The bonds are our debt. People buy our bonds, our debt. The Saudis, the Chinese buy our debt. The richest 1% buy these bonds. And that gives the federal government working cash to pay its yearly budget. But again, bonds, T-bills, are debt. We are borrowing that money to make up for the fact that the government spends more each year than it takes in. Our national debt right now is $39 trillion. In about 2 weeks, it's going to be $40 trillion. That means throughout the history of our nation, 250 years, we've run a budget deficit practically, at least, I mean, under Clinton, there were a couple of years we didn't have a budget deficit, but we've run budget deficits and we've had to issue bonds to cover the deficits. And it's come to a total of $39 trillion, close to $40 trillion, which means we've had to issue $40 trillion of bonds or debt because primarily of Donald Trump and George W. Bush cutting taxes for the wealthy. When you add the debt accumulated during Donald Trump's first term and his second, little more than a year into his second term, he's already responsible for more than 1/3 of our entire debt. He's the king of debt. And that debt in a few more days will be $40 trillion. $40 trillion. Why? Because Trump and George W. Bush and Reagan lower taxes for the rich. Now, GDP, that stands for gross domestic product. And that is what our entire economy, the gross domestic product, is what our entire economy produces in finished goods and services, right? So that's manufacturing and your douchebag accountant who charges you way too much. That's what the GDP stands for. All the goods and services produced within our borders. I have a good accountant, by the way. Now I love my accountant. I've had some bad ones. So that's GDP, gross domestic product. Then there's gross national product, and that's what the entire American economy produces in terms of goods and services, not just here in America, but worldwide. So we have Microsoft and Apple and accounting firms and law firms that have international business. That's the gross national product. And we do better on the gross national product than we do on the gross domestic product. But the gross domestic product, the goods and services manufactured inside our borders, that's what we use to measure our economy. That is the yardstick. The GDP is what we've agreed to be the yardstick for measuring how we're doing. They never asked me, do you like this yardstick? I would have said no. So, what was our GDP for 2025? $31 trillion. Okay, that means our economy within the borders produced $31 trillion worth of goods and services. In 2025, it was $31 trillion. So we're in 2026. If 2026 starts coming in above $31 trillion, that's considered good news. They call it growth. But if it drops below $31 trillion, then it's a recession. We need 2 quarters of the GDP going down, being worth less than $31 trillion. So if it goes down to $30 trillion this last quarter, and then goes down to $29 trillion the second quarter, we're in a recession. And if it drops way below $31 trillion, that's a depression. In other words, the reason our planet has reached the tipping point and we're all going to die from climate catastrophe, the reason this is happening is it's not good enough for our economy to produce $31 trillion worth of goods and services. You've got to produce, at the very least, 2% more each year. We have to keep growing. Otherwise, we're in a recession or a depression. And because this is the United States of America, it's more important for the economy to keep growing, even if it literally kills us. And it is. So our economy, $31 trillion last year, and our debt right now is going to be $40 trillion. So what does that mean? We have a $31 trillion a year economy, and our government's debt is $40 trillion. That means the United States government's debt is larger than the entire economy. And they call that the debt to GDP ratio. It's how much debt does the government have compared to the gross domestic product or the economy. Under Trump, this year, we haven't seen this kind of debt to GDP ratio since World War II. And that makes sense because we're living during World War Trump. Trump, by the way, wants World War Trump. So he's getting exactly what he wants, a world war. That's Saturday's notebook for this week. I'm going to stay right here for the next hour in the comments section of this video. I will pin my comment at the top right now, at the top of the comments section, and then leave your comments underneath it or respond to my pinned comic. I will talk with you for an hour in the comments section, and throughout the week, I'll be checking the comments section to respond. Tell me which story stuck with you. Tell me the one I missed. Tell me I got something wrong. I want to hear it. Pour another one. Light another one. I'll see you down there.